Dr. Jazz.
I'll just jump in.
Dr. Jazz.
Great.
You know, I have you on so many records, and so I thought I'd send you a message to see if we can do it, and I'm happy we did it. So, and we are doing it. And but
Where are you from?
I'm in Slovenia. I actually saw you.
Oh, right. You're in Slovenia. Okay.
I think you played in Ljubljana in 2006.
I've been there.
Yeah, I think I saw you then.
Yeah, and I also did a recording with an artist from there named Rock Golub.
Oh, Rock Golub. Yeah, sure.
Do you know Rock Golub?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, you because he went to LA to do
he went to LA, and I helped him put a project together. He was looking to get some musicians, and he knew. Actually, he contacted this engineer that I worked with a lot, a guy named Rich Breen, who I've been working with him for years, and I got him. Rich and I became working mates with Yellowjackets.
Okay.
So I think Rich has recorded at least 15 or 16 of the 20. I think they're up to 24, maybe 25 records. So he recorded I think at least 15 records. And anyway, Rich called me and asked me if I'd be interested in working on this project. This guy from Ljubljana, Slovenia, had some really cool music. And he was looking to hook up with certain musicians that Rich knew, that I knew, like Vinny Colaiuta on drums, Luis Conte on percussion. He wanted to try to get Steve Lukather, actually, who I also had done stuff with, but Steve was unavailable, so couldn't get Steve. I think he was going out with Toto for an extended tour.
Sure.
So, and then he wanted to hook up with Gino Vanelli, who I'd done a bunch of things with. So I helped Rock get all these people coordinated and on the sessions. Vinny and I and Luis recorded together, and then Gino was an overdub on one song. And then Rock actually decided to use this saxophonist from, I think he's from Sweden or Norway. I can't remember. His name is Bendik.
Oh yeah, sure. Bendik Hofstedt, yeah.
Yes, and I'd never played with Bendik before, but I loved his playing on a Steps Ahead record that I had. So we got together, and Rich Breen was the engineer, and we did it in a studio here in Los Angeles. And I think the record came out really, really well. It's old now, so
but you have a connection to Slovenia, so that's good.
Yeah, it's called The Story of Laxeno. The Story of Laxeno, which he had written like a libretto, a whole story about. And it was about maybe like an alien race that communicated through music and song. Kind of interesting.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Wow, I have to check it out. I don't know it. Yeah. But,
and actually, I ended up playing, doing something in Slovenia with a big band there. And Rock was around, but this had to do with Bob Mintzer, because Bob Mintzer, who's got like 1,000 big band records, and he was in the Yellowjackets. He would hook us up with all these big bands around the world.
Yeah.
And so the Yellowjackets got to do special concerts with big band. And I think we had about 18 songs or so that were all written out for big bands. So if there was a big band interested in working with us, we had music to, give to the director of the big band, and then we could do concerts.
How was that like for you guys to play with a big band?
Oh, it was great. It's really great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So we did. We played with some big bands in the U.S., but they were mostly college big bands. And then in Europe, we played with some professional big bands like the LH, which is in Frankfurt. We did a bunch of things with the
WDR,
with
right?
VDR,
VDR,
the VDR in out of Cologne. There was a big band in Aalborg, Denmark that we played with. I don't remember the name of them. And there was a really good big band in Stockholm, Sweden that we worked with. And then we also worked with a big band in Milan, Italy.
Really? I didn't know that.
So we got to do a bunch of that. And having Bob Mintzer in the band he just made it really simple in that respect. And it gave the Yellowjackets another avenue to do concerts and, perform music with the extended group, you know.
And it's also important, I think, that, after playing 30 years, I guess, or 20 years together,
it's like, now what are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need something. I remember I played with Paul McCandless, from Oregon. And we played quite a lot together. And then he always said they always added something, either it was, Elvin Jones for a record, or they did it something with an orchestra that just to keep the things interesting,
Yeah, just to as they say, shake the tree a little bit.
Yeah.
Do something that's, so you're not doing the same thing record after record after record. And after a while, your audience can sometimes get bored, so you want to keep things interesting. And as an artist and a composer and an arranger and a producer, you want to make that side of the fence interesting as well. So, so that's, and I was in the Yellowjackets for a long time. So
let's put it like that.
I recorded 22 records with that band, and every time it was time to do a record, I would just recall it was a challenge because we had to talk about what we were going to do and try to come up with, like you say, a little different angle on the record. What are we going to do this time? Are we going to have, we even did collaborations. It's like we just talked about. So, did a record with Mike Stern. Obviously in the beginning we had Robben Ford, who was actually in the band, but that always kept the door open for us to collaborate with guitar players. So we did a fair share of that.
Yeah, that's so important. It's just, I mean, I don't imagine to play with the same people for 30 years, or it has its
a long time.
It has its pros and cons in a way. Of course, you know each other really well, but on the other hand, you also know each other really well. So it's like, it can be.
Yeah, we're trying to come up with a new vision for the music. Maybe a new concept for the band. So there was always that. I actually love that, because having a challenge like that really makes you push forward. Gives you motivation to find new things. For better or for worse.
Sure.
I'm not saying that everything was successful, but at least it gives you the opportunity to try something different. And if it fails, you learn from that as well. As the saying goes, you you learn from your mistakes. So,
Yeah.
So that was always on the table. And I had some 32 years of that. And that, I think, to be honest, those 32 years with that band, really helped me in a big way as a producer. So when I left the Yellowjackets in 2012, I had all this knowledge and motivation to work with other people, and it just and with every year after that, I would learn some new things. So it's been quite an interesting path.
Oh man, definitely. Yeah.
I think this guy's redoing my website. I think he was asking me how many records I produced. So I think I'm around 250 records that I've produced. Something like that. It's kind of silly, but I'm trying to come up with a definitive list of things I've produced, and it's been hard. I forget some things because I produced stuff really a long time ago, and sometimes people will send me something and they go, "Do you remember this?" And I go, "Oh wow, I completely forgot about that." So I'm trying to recall all this stuff that I've done in the past, be able to come up with some kind of list for this webmaster that's redoing my website. So that's been interesting.
That would be cool to see. The list. What's your role? How do you change your role as a producer? I mean, as a bass player and composer, but when you're a producer.
Well, if I'm just producing a record without playing or anything like that, because that's not required. I don't require that. If somebody wants me to play, we can talk about it. But if they just want me to produce a record, like I just recently, an example is a very fine guitarist named Mike Miller.
Oh yeah, sure.
Mike Miller's really great. He actually played with the Yellowjackets for a short amount of time during the second recording, which was a record called Mirage à Toi.
Yeah.
And he played on about half of the record, and I'd known him for years prior to that. But just recently, like in the last year and a half or so, he reached out to me, and he had all this music that he had been writing, and some of it was unfinished. And he just was confused about what songs to pick to make a record, because he had too much material. And I think somebody called that a champagne problem, which means it's a good problem.
It's a good problem.
But regardless, it's still a problem. You're trying to get an idea of like a statement, try to put a statement together. So that's where I could come in. Somebody like Mike called me and said, "I have all this music. Maybe you listen to it and tell me your thoughts about what should be on this record." Because there was way too much music for a record. And then also, you're looking at direction. Some things were, there were things that were different from each other that wouldn't necessarily fit on the same record, and you don't want to confuse the listener or even confuse the people that are promoting the record, because that's happened. I remember a bass player asking me to listen to his record and give him some thoughts about this record. So when I listened to the record had so many different directions. There was like a Latin tune, there was a straight ahead tune, then there was a funk tune, then there was like a fusion-y kind of tune, then there was kind of like maybe an orchestral piece, and it's like I don't, it's confusing to listen to that all under one record. So I wasn't. My advice was that the record was finished, so there was nothing I could do about it. But I said, my advice would be the next time you do a record, try to pick like a genre and focus on that, and then you could maybe have one or two things that are in different places just for a dynamic, but if every song is different, that's too frayed. There's no connection with the music. So anyway, that's what I tried to do with Mike Miller, is listen to all the music he had and try to focus in on a direction. And what I found was, I think he had like 20 songs. So I found 7 that felt fit together pretty well. And then from that, you had at least you had a nucleus, a nucleus of a direction. And then if you wanted to add a couple of things from somewhere else, it's okay. That actually makes a record interesting, to have something all of a sudden that's really different. Let's go, oh, what's that? But so that, as a producer, your question was, how do I approach that, as opposed to being a bass player or a composer? And so production, for me, is, I love doing that, because then I don't have to worry about planning. I don't have to worry about really writing, unless, I feel like the artist needs help. And then maybe I can help, or I can connect him with another writer.
Yeah, exactly.
That might be complementary, and then they can finish writing material for the record, So I can help coordinate things like that to keep things in focus and moving forward,
Yeah, that's good.
Completion.
Sometimes people need that. Especially with, you've done so much different styles of music, and so you have a really, I think, a good overview of
I've over the years, I've listened to and been involved with a lot of different kinds of music. So, and I look at that as an important factor for any producer, to have a wide vision of things, so they can help focus things in that respect.
Yeah, it's through the years, still you kind of became known as I hate this term, but like a fusion bass player, let's put it, or jazz
fusion bass player.
All these terms, but what got you excited? Like, I've read that you're self-taught actually on bass, and
yes.
Who got you excited, like in mid-60s or late 60s, I guess, that you said like, oh shit, I want to play that? Like,
well, the thing that I think my family was a big factor. That all my immediate family loved music, and they loved a lot of different kinds of music. So I grew up listening to a wide gamut of musical styles, and I think growing up in that environment really had a lot of, for me, a lot of inspiration about music and what music is, and that music isn't just one thing, it's a lot of different things. And that was, when I was a kid, that was just the domestic influx of music, you know, so I was listening to rock, you know, and some of that was from overseas. You know, there was the British invasion in the 60s. So you had the Beatles, and you had, you know, then later, you know, or, you know, during the Beatles, when the Beatles were coming in, you had the Rolling Stones.
Hendrix
you had
and Cream.
groups like the Hollies. Yeah. Well, then later, yeah, Hendrix and Cream, that went into the later 60s, you know, and then I started, you know, hearing stuff from San Francisco, you know, like the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane, and, you know, guys like Elvin Bishop, you know, was like a blues band. So there was all that going on with my peers. But then, you know, my parents, they would put on, like, you know, Count Basie and Duke Ellington, and then, you know, they'd play like even like Mantovani, you know, which is
that's right.
You know what that is, but that's kind of like it's kind of like elevator music, but it's interesting in that sense. And then they would put on, because my parents were born and raised in Puerto Rico, so they would put on Ray Barretto and Tito Puente and Celia Cruz and Mongo Santa Maria and, you know, Machito, all kinds of stuff like that. And then I had an older brother who I still have, but, you know, when I was like 8 years old, he was 18. He was almost 11 years older than me. So he would bring me into his room and he would play me John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk and Dave Brubeck and, you know, Miles Davis, you know, Charles Mingus, all this stuff, you know, and as a kid, you're going like, wow, what's this? You know, but then he also had a love for classical music. So he would also play Prokofiev and Stravinsky and Mozart and Brahms and Debussy, you know, so he had all that going on. And then my mom's sister came to live with us for a long time, for basically my whole childhood. And she was into this like adult pop music. So from her room, I would hear like Jerry Vale, Johnny Mathis, you know, Robert Goulet, just to name a few, you know, Bobby Vinton, you know, things like that. So in my house, there was all this music, and, you know, every day was something different, you know, and that gave me a pretty wide perspective about music. Then also growing up in New York was like a magnet for music and for artists, and there were all these places to go hear music. So you had the Village, Soho, they had all the jazz clubs, and they have folk clubs, you know, like the Bitter End. So you could, you know, hear Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell. And then they had like the Village Gate and the Village Vanguard. So you could hear, you know, jazz, you know, I saw Freddie Hubbard there. I saw this other trumpet player named Ted Kurson. I went because I played trumpet for 12 years.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
From like the 4th grade through high school, you know. And that's what happened was these friends of mine when I was in junior high school. You know, I played sports, so they were on this football team with me, and they wanted to put a band together to play these like pool parties and you know, all kinds of little dances and things. And they said, hey, you play music, you're a trumpet player, why don't you buy a bass? And, you know, we don't have a bass player, you know. So a couple of guys played guitar, guy played drums, was a lead singer, and then I went with my dad and we bought a bass, and that's what started. I was 13,
Oh, okay.
So then I started playing trumpet when I was 7. So so I had a lot of music in my life growing up, and the environment was as such that I grew up in a place that had a lot of music. New York, it's
Yeah.
known for all kinds of music.
Yeah.
And I saw all this music live, a lot of live performance. Hendrix, I saw Hendrix 5 times.
Oh man, are you serious?
know,
Come on. Oh,
yes. I saw the Cream. I saw
wow.
Yes. I saw Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Chicago Transit Authority, which
Yeah.
got shortened to Chicago. Jethro Tull, Grand Funk Railroad. I mean, all these bands I saw live.
Mm.
Right? And Sly and the Family Stone, Tina Turner. I even saw her live. James Brown. There's so much stuff going on, and I got to see it all live, and that also was very motivating.
Oh, sure, man. Yeah,
To
that's
see all that. And then playing bass, I started focusing on all these bass parts, for songs, Motown and
yeah, James Jamerson, all those
rock.
guys. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I got really into that whole culture, buying vinyl and looking at all the credits and knowing all the names of the musicians and all the bands. And it was kind of a fabulous thing to grow up with.
Yeah.
And that's still in me, even today in 2023. All that energy is still inside of me, and I think about it. And then there's new stuff that's going on. It's been going on over the years, and you try to keep up with it all. You can't keep up with everything, but I'm pretty aware of everything that's pretty much going on, whether I like it or not.
Yeah, sure.
I listen to everything. I try to listen to everything.
Yeah, that's makes sense. I mean,
So
yeah,
yeah. So as a producer, all this information helps.
Oh man, yeah, definitely. But you said you started to play bass and checking out all these records, and what were your first steps? Like, you were still in New York, in the New York scene, and in the New York, like, I guess beginning of the 70s or mid 70s. Jaco came later also, I guess. How did that touch you and when you first heard him, actually? And
well, Jaco I met in 1975 when he first joined Weather Report. And so I didn't know, nobody knew who he was, really. And I just happened to be rehearsing next door to Weather Report with a band I was in
really
here in Los Angeles. And yeah, it was quite a coincidence. And then, and I was a big fan of Weather Report before Jaco, with Alfonso Johnson, and even with Miroslav Mitos, So yeah, Miroslav was great. I loved his playing. I was rehearsing with this band. We were close to getting a little record deal, and we were in rehearsal. And the same management company that was working our music was managing Weather Report. So that's why we were in the same rehearsal facility at the same time. And so I snuck into the Weather Report rehearsal and sat in the back area to listen. And there was this guy playing. I thought it was going to be Alfonso Johnson because it was right around the time of a record called Black Market. I don't know if you know that record, but that's a really cool record.
Of course.
Yeah. And so that had just come out. So I didn't even know a lot about that record, but I wanted to check them out. So I went in there, and there was this other guy playing bass. It wasn't Alphonso Johnson, but it was unbelievable. It was like, who is this? So I stayed around when we were done with our rehearsal. I stayed in the lounge, and I waited till they came out. They finished their rehearsal, and I just walked up to Jocko and I said, "Look, I don't know who you are, but do you give lessons?"
Oh,
And he
wow.
said, "Yes."
Oh, wow, really?
And then he said, "Come on." He said, "We're gonna get something to eat. Let's go get something to eat." And I went, "Great." So I jumped in a car with Jocko and Alex Acuna, who I'd just met, and we went to a restaurant, had some dinner, and then Jocko played me he put headphones on my head and he said, "Listen to this." And he played me tracks from his first record, which wasn't even out yet. So the first thing I heard was his version of Donna Lee with Don Elias. So that was amazing. And I spent maybe a few days, like 3 or 4 days, hanging with him at this rehearsal facility and at his hotel. And we did some practicing, and he gave me some lessons.
Oh,
so that was like an explosion, and that was 1975. That was the first year I had moved to Los Angeles, because prior to 75, I was living in New Orleans. I was playing with a rock and roll band in New Orleans, just playing local gigs, and did some sessions there. But then I ended up in LA doing a bunch of stuff, and then all this stuff started happening.
How come you decided for LA and not New York, actually?
Well, I'd been living in New York, and a friend of mine who's a famous drummer at the time, and he still is. His name is Carmine Appice, or Carmine Appice.
Sure.
He was a drummer in the Vanilla Fudge, and he saw me in New Orleans, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, I'm playing music." And he said, "Here's my number in LA. Come to LA, and I'll help you find some work."
Wow. Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. So a few months later, I got in a car with this guitar player that I'd been playing with, and we drove to Los Angeles from New Orleans, and we hooked up with Carmine. And sure enough, he started hooking me up with all kinds of people. I met all the guys from Deep Purple and the guys from Led Zeppelin, and he was working in a band called KGB, of all things. I met those guys, and then I ended up doing a record with Carmine.
Wow, really?
Went in the studio, and we did a whole record. I played bass, and it was mostly Carmine, myself, and this keyboard player named Max Middleton.
Oh,
Max Middleton,
with Jeff Beck, who played,
was Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, wow, man.
So I was like in the studio with those guys, and I thought, well, this is cool,
That's incredible.
And then, just things just kept happening. I went on tour with Harvey Mandel, and of course, with that tour, we opened for Jeff Beck and the On Hammer group. Ended up meeting those guys, and then later, I worked with this artist named Jackie Lomax, who was one of the first artists on Apple Records. He was a singer-songwriter. I was in a band. I joined the Tommy Bolin band.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that had the keyboard player. Yeah, from the Vanilla Fudge, Mark Stein, who left the band after a while. And then this other keyboard player came in, who was a great singer named Max Carl, is his actual name. Now he's the lead singer and second guitar player and keyboard player with Grand Funk Railroad. So it's, just things just started happening, and LA seemed like a cool place to be.
I love the cooking books, by the way. I have like half of those cooking books that you have, I have at home actually. Here. I love cooking.
Oh, wow.
You have Yota
Yeah,
Motomami
me
plenty
too.
and Silver Spoon, I see. I love that stuff.
Yeah. We love to cook here. My wife is a really good cook. My stepson, my wife's youngest boy, he's 40, but he's a chef.
Oh wow, beautiful.
So we have a
wow.
lot of cooking in the family here. So
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
it's one of the best things.
And he just put out a cookbook. In fact, hold
Oh
on.
really?
I'm gonna get some. Yeah. His own cookbook. He's been I think this is like his fourth cookbook,
Really?
but three of them have been for other chefs, and he's been the writer and the collaborator. But this is his own cookbook.
Oh man.
Do I have it right? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And his name is
vegetarian.
Noah
Man.
Galutin, and yeah, it's a vegetarian book. It's really good. And he actually wrote a book on vegetables. It's called the Don't Panic Pantry, because he came up with this with his wife, Eliza Schlesinger, during COVID. Just they had a podcast.
Really?
And they did like 240 shows during COVID, and it was him just talking about whatever's in the cupboard or in your pantry. You can make a nice dinner, a healthy dinner,
Exactly.
And then so he came up with this, and of course, he learned a lot about cooking from his mom, who's my wife.
Beautiful. Wow.
So
I'll
and
check
it
it out.
came out today. Today was the first day for the release of this book.
Oh, wow.
So
this looks like as if we
very
agreed,
excited. Yeah, we're very excited for him.
Beautiful.
Also, like there's a forward or a nice little section, a couple of things. He actually wrote a book for this chef named Jeremy Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy Fox has what's that called? It's when you have my wife's yelling something from the other room. Michelin star.
Michelin stars. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeremy Fox has a Michelin star for vegetarian cooking. And my stepson Noah, collaborated with him on this book some years ago, and they got nominated for a James Beard Award.
Oh yeah, sure.
So
wow, I have to check it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I show you my cookbook closet there,
yeah,
it's insane.
We have a whole giant bookshelf filled
Yeah.
with cookbooks.
It's crazy.
Because we like to cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets out of hand then after a certain time. I'm like, yeah, I need this. Which, yeah, anyway, it's like records. It's the same.
It is.
Yeah.
And just a little side note, my parents weren't extremely happy when I was like 18 and I was leaving New York and trying to be a professional musician. I was working with bands. I was making money. I was making a living, so to speak. But they were really concerned. And so I told them that what made them feel better is that if it didn't work out for me to be a professional musician, then I was leaning towards going to some kind of a culinary school to become a chef. And they liked that idea. So they gave me their blessing. They said, see what happens. And as time went on, they saw that I was really focused on being a musician. So and they got it. They came to a lot of the concerts that I was in, traveling with Dave Mason. I was in his band for a while. So you mentioned something earlier about me being a fusion bass player. I guess that's what people think when they hear my name, but really, my roots are rhythm and blues and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So that's where that I lean towards that. Just that I got into progressive rock, like bands like Gentle Giant and Yes, King Crimson.
Yeah.
Even Jethro Tull, I felt was very progressive in their own way, and so that led me to getting into this whole fusion thing. And then of course, when I was one of the founding members of the Yellowjackets, that pushed me over the edge for the fusion category. And then I ended up playing with a lot of really cool people.
How did you hook up with the guys of the Yellowjackets? When did that happen? When was the first meeting? I mean, when did you meet them? Like Robben and Russell, I guess.
I met Robben first, and I was playing with a Brazilian fusion band, but it was led by Flora Purin.
Oh, really?
And her husband,
wow.
Famous percussionist Ayrton.
Sure.
Ayrton Muriera. Yeah, so I ended up in their band, and that was an interesting situation because originally I went to this rehearsal hall to audition for Michael Narda Walden's band. Do you know who that is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, come on. Yeah.
So,
wow.
So here's how crazy it was. I went to that audition, and I was playing in this little rehearsal room with Michael Narda Walden on drums and a very young Steve Lukather on guitar.
Oh my
who
God.
I had just met. And we were just jamming in this little rehearsal room to, kind of get acquainted. And someone came into the room to listen because I guess they liked what they heard. I don't know. But they were standing there in the room just like listening to us. And then eventually Narda stopped playing and he went, "Oh man, how's it going?" And he went over to him and gave him a big hug. So Narda knew who it was. And it ended up being Ndugu Leon Chancellor.
Oh, wow, man.
The drummer with George Duke.
Yeah, sure.
and they were auditioning bass players in another room. So Ndugu asked me to come over and audition for George Duke.
Wow, man.
Which I did. And then George said, "Well, you sound great, but we already got a bass player who was this guy named Byron Miller, who ended up being George Duke's bass player, who I now been friends with a long time." But George gave me a phone number and he said, "I know somebody else looking for a bass player right now. They're going to go do a tour. Call this number." And that was Flora Purim's number.
Wow, man.
Who he had been producing. So I went and auditioned for that, and I got the gig. And I auditioned in her living room of her house with just a drummer. It was a bass and drums. And she just asked us to play certain grooves and things. And the drummer was somebody I just met that day. And that drummer was named Ricky Lawson.
Oh, wow.
Who was the original drummer of
Yellowjackets. Yeah. Oh, wow, man.
So funny enough, we go on tour with Flora Purim for like 3 or 4 months, whatever it was. I come home. Well, the last gig was 2 nights here in Los Angeles were the last gigs of that tour. and we played this place called the Roxy. And when that gig was finished, I was packing up and walking off the stage. And this guy came up to me that was a guest because it was backstage. And he said, "Hey, I like the way you play, and I'm getting ready to do a record. And maybe you could come to my house and we can play some songs together." I said, "Great," and I said, "Well, what's your name?" And he goes, "Robben Ford."
Oh, wow.
So that's where I met Robben Ford on the last show of the Flora Pura Majerto tour. I ended up going to Robben's house, and then we played, and it was fun. And he said he had a piano player that was coming down from San Jose, California, which is up north, and that was Russell Ferrante.
Oh, wow. Okay. Quite a coincidence, everything.
And then they said he needed a drummer. And I had been playing with Ricky Lawson. So we brought Ricky over, and there was the original band. And we went in the studio and we did Robben's record. That's called The Inside Story. You can still find it in Japan. Yeah. And The Inside Story was produced by Steve Cropper, who I was a fan of. Steve Cropper played with Wilson Pickett, and he wrote Midnight Hour, which is a famous R&B song from the 60s. And he was also the guitarist in Booker T and the MGs. Booker T being a famous B3 player. They had an instrumental hit called Green Onions back in the 60s. So, and while I was recording that record, I got to meet Duck Dunn, Duck Dunn was a famous session bass player and played with Eric Clapton for a while. So that all this stuff was happening, and I was living in here in LA, and I was thinking, this is a great place to be, and meet people and play music. And the 70s was really a good time for music, and even the 80s. Things were changing, but there was still a lot of music, and there was still a music business, which now in 2023, it's very different. So,
but
I miss the energy of the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s. By the time the 90s rolled around, things were starting to change. And by the time the year 2000 came about, there was big changes, So,
how did you
now being out of the... Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, how did you survive the 80s? I mean, you caught like the last train of the studio work, and when I see who you played with in the 80s, besides touring with the Yellowjackets and everyone, how did that work? I spoke once with Randy Brecker, and he said, like, we played with, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen, then we did a Hal Galper record, then we did this, and then we toured and played gigs. Like, how was that like for you? I mean, like, that period.
Same kind of thing, So I was in the Yellowjackets. So it was a new band. The first record came out in 1980.
There's a whole big crack in the wall since the earthquake.
Oh, wow. We had an earthquake the other day. So my wife saw a crack in the wall.
That's encouraging.
Of the house, yeah. Yeah. So I was in the Yellowjackets, but then I was doing other things as well. Like I said, I did a bunch of recording with Dave Mason, with Gino Vanelli. Also, I toured with Roy Ayers and Ubiquity. I was on the road with them a little bit. I was on the road with the Yellowjackets, of course. And then I joined Al Jarreau's band, and I was in that band for 3 years doing stuff. I also did a Ron Wood record with Charlie Watts on drums, and
Oh wow.
Ian McLaughlin on organ.
Hmm.
Yeah, and Nicky Hopkins on piano. That was produced and engineered by Andy Johns, who I did a bunch of work with Rod Stewart in the 80s. Also worked with Shaka Khan. I was in her band for a while with, yeah. So there's a lot going on like that, you know, and then were records with Gino. I did 5 records with Gino. And that was amazing. I was touring as well with a really good R&B pop singer named Bobby Caldwell. And that was very interesting, mostly in Japan.
Jimmy, how did you, you know, besides all these players, how did you end with Allan Holdsworth? And what was your experience like with him? You know, me being a guitarist, I spoke the other day with Gary Husband, like this interview, and you know, what are your thoughts on Allan and your meeting him? How did that happen?
That was incredible, and I was a big fan, obviously, of his music and his playing.
Yeah,
and especially two rhythm sections. I'm sorry about that. Drop something. There's two rhythm sections that I really loved. I mean, I loved all the recordings, but there are 2 rhythm sections that I absolutely loved, and that was Jimmy Johnson and Chad Wackerman.
Yeah.
And so I used to listen to all those records. They did most of the recordings, but there was a really nice record that I absolutely loved, and that had a bass player that I spent a little time with, and a drummer that I do a lot of work with, Gary Novak.
Oh yeah.
And the bass player was Dave Carpenter.
Oh, 16 Men of Tain. I love that record. Yeah,
love the record.
What's the
incredible
first
record?
0274. That's, oh man, that's.
So I was listening to all that, and you know, and then all of a sudden, and you know, here's the real crazy thing. In the early 70s, I was living in San Francisco. And then I would every once in a while come home and like visit with my mom and dad and my friends. And then one time I came home and a friend of mine said, "Hey, this guy Allan Holdsworth is playing." No, he didn't say that. He said this guy Tony Williams is playing at a club near your house. I said, "Oh, you mean there was a place in Roslyn, New York called My Father's Place?" That was the name of the club. And they had international groups coming in all the time. And I saw a lot of bands there. So Tony Williams, I was a big fan of. We didn't know what it was, but it said Tony Williams Lifetime. So we said, let's go check it out. So we got tickets, we went in, and it was this band with Allan Holdsworth, Alan Pasqua on keyboards, and a really great bass player named Tony Newton. And they were playing music from a record called Believe It, which wasn't even out yet. It hadn't even been released. And we were just like checking these guys out going, this is incredible. It's like a rock band, but beyond that, you know, and I never heard a guitar player sound like Allan Holdsworth. So I was just blown away by him. And then later I got into all his music and stuff. And I actually met him a couple of times, like, you know, these things called NAMM shows. Yeah. So there's one in Anaheim here in California. So a couple of times when I was down there working, doing something for some manufacturer, I would run into Allan Holdsworth and people would introduce us, and it was great. But you know, he was playing with Jimmy Johnson and Chad Wackerman. I was doing Yellowjackets and all this other stuff. So all of a sudden, I think it was around 2002, I got a phone call from Alan Pasqua, who I knew. I knew Alan and done a bunch of things with him. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Well, I'm supposed to go out on tour with Allan Holdsworth, a tribute to Tony Williams and the Tony Williams Lifetime. And the bass player doesn't feel good and he's canceling." And that was Alfonso Johnson. And Alan Pasqua said, "Would you be willing to do this tour?" And I went, "Wow, okay. Well, what are the dates?" And he gave me the dates, and I looked, and I was able to move a few things around, and I did the tour.
Wow.
And on that tour, somewhere in the middle of that tour, we decided to do a DVD, which was up in Oakland, California at Yoshi's, club called Yoshi's. So that came out pretty good. Although I was just like learning the music at that time, but at the same time, it was a pretty good performance. And the company that put the DVD out did a really good job with the filming and the recording and all that. And so that was it. I ended up playing in that quartet for a couple of years. And then after that, Alan liked playing with me, and we liked each other as people, and he just said, "Do you want to do some trio gigs with me?" And I said, "I'd love to." So I ended up doing a few trio things with Chad Wackerman, but the bulk of the trio stuff that I did was with Virgil Donati.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh,
yeah.
I love Virgil. Yeah. Oh man, that must have been heavy. Whew.
I did. Yeah, it was unbelievable. So I ended up, working with Virgil on other things as well. And he's incredible.
He's a monster. Yeah.
So I probably did, I don't know, 80 or 90 shows, maybe more, maybe 100 shows with Virgil. I probably did, a month or so of gigs with Chad and some other little special things that we did. I think Chad had something with a cymbal company at a NAMM show, and he asked me and Alan to do it with him. So we did. And then I ended up, one of the last things I did was a really nice tour with Gary Husband.
Yeah, I saw that on YouTube. It's incredible.
Yeah. We went to Korea, but we did all of East Coast and Chicago, some other gigs in the Midwest, and then we went to Japan, and we went to Korea, and it was a place north of Seoul. I can't even pronounce the name, but it was an hour plus north of there, in a really big open field, and it was a festival called Jerusalem. And so that was one of the last. I did some more gigs with Alan and Virgil after that. Somewhere in there, I even did like a one show, I think, with Gary Novak and Alan.
Really?
And Alan Pasqua.
Oh,
Yeah, because
wow.
I think Chad, we were doing this one show here in LA, and Chad was unavailable, so we got Gary Novak to do it. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you guys ever talk about music, like how to play those tunes, or like how did you learn the music? Because I know I've spoken with Steve Hunt, the piano player who played with Alan, and he said like there were no lead sheets.
There's no charts.
Yeah. How did that work?
Well, I used to learn a lot of music just by ear, just memorizing stuff. So that wasn't a far-fetched way of learning the music, but it's very complex, and there's a lot going on. So it took me some time to really feel fully comfortable with the music. But I also got some cheat sheets from Jimmy Johnson.
Okay.
he had some cheat sheets that helped me with at least some of the harmony.
Yeah,
Because even like the bar lines and the meter and stuff, none of that was written out. So you had to kind of figure out if there was like a bar of 7 and then 2 bars of 5 and then back to 4/4 and then a bar of 9. It's like all over the place. But even with the Yellowjackets, I had a lot of experience with odd meter music. So I was fairly comfortable with understanding what the music was. It was just a matter of getting comfortable with actually playing the parts and learning how to improvise over some of this stuff, to make it, all
organic.
flow.
Yeah.
Make it organic. Yeah. So that was another explosion of knowledge and experience for myself, and I've been fortunate to have quite a few experiences like that help with motivating what I'm doing and even encourage me to continue in study of music and harmony and just music in general, understanding more about music. The more you know, the more you learn, the more you understand that you don't know enough.
Yeah, exactly. True, exactly.
There's so much to learn, so it's a lifelong. I never thought of that when I first became a professional musician, but but in a way there was signs, that this is not just like you learn something and then
you do
that's
it. Yeah.
You're a happening guy, it just never ends. And my favorite analogy of that is I once saw a little video interview with Pablo Casals. Pablo Casals is a famous cellist. And I think during the interview, he was like 82 or something like that. He was up in years. And at one point he told the interviewer, well, I've been playing for 70 years or whatever it was. It's a long time. And he goes, and I think I'm finally getting somewhere. So it's like, and when I saw that interview, I'd only been playing for like 35 years. So I said, wow, this guy's been playing twice as long as I have. And he thinks he's just now getting somewhere.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I have a long way to go.
Okay. Oh man. Yeah.
But it's all okay. It's all fine.
Yeah. But Jimmy, just I could ask you, like, probably we could talk for hours, like, about every musician and band what you play, but I will not harass you.
That's okay. You can ask me anything you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, about your solo projects. I love what in your writing. I love when you did Arc and Red Heat, and you wrote so much beautiful music, for Yellowjackets, and I love that ballad you wrote, Mata. I love that melody. And what's happening on your solo recording kind of department? Is there like another album coming out there? Are you as a solo artist, or are you writing new music? Or
my time is a problem. So I'm producing quite a bit now. I'm actually currently, I had to write this down. I'm also doing just sessions, not producing, just playing bass on the things. But accumulatively, I had to write this down because I was starting to get overwhelmed. And I find that when I write things down on paper and I look at them, it gives me a little more ease, and I feel more relaxed about it. because I am pretty good at multitasking, you know, doing a lot of things all at once. And I felt like I was starting to get a little anxiety or something
Yeah.
about what was going on. Now my computer's not working, so that's giving me anxiety. But I guess last week I wrote everything down on paper, and it turned out to be 22 projects that I'm
Oh,
working on simultaneously right
that's
now.
crazy. That's
It is kind of crazy.
wow.
I'll admit it. And you know, it's all different. There, the projects are all in different
That's
points of
amazing. That's
completion.
amazing. Yeah.
So there's some that are just starting. There's some that are kind of in the middle. Then there's some that haven't started yet, but I'm waiting for budgets. And then there's stuff that's finished that I'm now in post-production, you know, getting things either released as a self-release by the artist or with a distribution deal, which you know, in the last 5 years, I've been affiliated with two small boutique record companies that I solicit music to as a sort of an A&R type of freelance A&R, if there is such a thing. And so I've been working with Blue Canoe Records, which I've done the most things with. I think I've brought them 30 records in the last 4.5, 5 years, maybe more. I don't know. I lost count. But they're out of Las Vegas, and it's a small label. It's connected to the Orchard and Sony Music. And they also have some affiliation with promotion with Jazz's magazine, which is now just it's a quarterly magazine, and it's also has it's also has a spot that they're online, so you can, I guess, you can get a subscription from them to just do the magazine online, or they actually have physical copies. So if you want, you know, they would send you a physical copy, but it's every 3 months that comes out. And that they just ran a full ad because, you know, I just produced this posthumously, this Allan Holdsworth, Alan Pasqua quartet record with Chad Wackerman and myself, which were outtakes from the DVD that we did in Yoshi's. But I found that some of the outtakes were better than the ones that were on the, my opinion, it's my opinion, but I thought they had something interesting that was completely different than what we had chosen to put out on the DVD. So I took, with permission from Alan Pasqua and Chad Wackerman and the Allan Holdsworth estate, which is his children.
Yeah.
I got permission to work on this, and I took it into the studio for about 10 days and did a bunch of editing and, you know, some tweaking and things, and put this record together that I got approval from Alan Pasqua and Chad Wackerman and the estate, and it's out now. I think it came out in October.
Oh man, I have to find it. Okay, shit. Oof.
It's called Protocosmos.
Okay, wow, okay.
Which is one of the songs on the record. And I might even have a copy here. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, it's this.
Oh wow, okay, I have to check it. Wow, okay,
yeah,
amazing. I read
so
it.
I found the graphics. I do all that kind of stuff. There was found an old photo of us in Europe. I had really long hair.
Man.
And yeah, this is go like back in 2004 or something like that.
Wow.
But I think there's some cool stuff on here. And then I might as well keep going here. At around the same time I put this record out. I should somewhere have Mike Miller's record, but this is a cool record. It's a singer named Marilyn Scott,
Right.
and there's some really cool music. Scott Kinsey's on it.
Oh wow, okay.
Vinny Colaiuta's on it. Gary Novak. Who else? A bunch of people. Steve Kahn.
Wow.
On guitar. And Mike Miller, I think, played on something. That's a cool record. And then I just now finished this record, which is a guy named Jeff Richman.
Oh, sure. Oh, man.
XYZ.
He's incredible. Yeah, I love him.
This has got Vinny Colaiuta on almost the whole record. Gergo Borlai is on a track from Budapest.
Yeah.
Also Scott Kinsey and Russell Ferrante.
Oh wow, beautiful, man.
Yeah, it's a lot of cool stuff on here.
Well,
yeah,
write it down.
But so these are fairly new. Those three. The Jeff Richman record isn't even out yet. It's coming out, I think, in April, which is not that far away, really.
Yeah.
I found a couple other things that I had handy here on my desk. This came out in like June. It was a little trio project, kind of like ECM type of thing.
Yeah, I heard that on Bandcamp. That's quite different, actually.
It's pretty. Yeah, it's very different, and I mostly played fretless on the whole thing.
Sounds beautiful.
But it features this really cool guitar player named Barry Coates and this interesting drummer named Jerry Culliffe. So there's that, and then I should just do this. This came out last year. It's just a duo record with a saxophonist named Randall Despommier. He's from New Orleans originally, but he lives in New York. And a very interesting guitar player named Ben Monder.
Oh man, he's my hero. He's like, I mean, I've been a fan of Ben.
He's great.
Oh man, he's a monster.
And this is all like, it's like the music of Lars Gullin.
Yeah,
I don't know if you know.
Yeah, sure.
Who's a famous Swedish saxophonist. It's all his music.
Wow, I have to find it.
And this is a very interesting record. So I produced this. Obviously, there's no bass, so I didn't play. It's just producing. And then here's just something from a different thing. I got Steve Kahn had called me to listen to something, and it was a record he played on. And there's a band that I've been a fan of forever called Guaco, out of Caracas, Venezuela. And one of the interesting musicians in that band is a guy named Rafael Greco. Plays keyboards, he plays saxophone, he also sings, and he did his own record. And he's got Steve Kahn guesting on a couple of songs. It is very nice, and also Randy Brecker is on a song. Wow. And so I A&R'd this to Blue Canoe. It's Rafael Greco, Signs of Life. Dice que vive is actually the title, but we did a little translation type of thing to put it in English as well, because it was being distributed here in the US. And this is a really interesting record. I love it. And then I don't have a copy of this, but I'm excited about. There's a kind of a cool record that I did a lot of work with on production, but I got Jeff Lorber to do all the writing on. And it's a saxophonist out of Salt Lake City, Utah. That came out in July of last year, and that's a record called Stargazer. And he's a really great saxophonist. And his name is Randall Clark. Randall Clark. And actually, Jeff and I and Gary Novak played on most of pretty much the whole record. And we're going to Salt Lake City, to his hometown. We're going to do a concert end of February there.
Oh, beautiful. Man.
So you see,
that gives
you another idea of like what's going on here is all this stuff. This all just came out. This is all new
amazing.
stuff.
That's amazing, man. Wow. Are you still touring? I mean, are you gonna come to Europe maybe this year?
Yeah, I think so. It looks like there's something in Europe that's coming together for the month of July.
Okay.
So typical time for
Festival, yeah.
touring in Europe, and it's with Mike Stern's band.
Ooh, okay.
I'll be playing with Mike Stern. I think it's Dennis Chambers on drums and Bob Franceschini on saxophone.
Wow, fantastic.
And probably Mike's wife, Lenny Stern. Yeah, she'll be involved as well. So that's happening, I think, in July. I just got a message from Mike's booking agent there in Italy, and he sent me kind of a time frame.
Yeah.
So it's not a long tour. It'd be like just a couple of weeks, maybe.
Wrote it down.
Yeah, like 13 days or so.
Oh,
so
super.
there's that. I got some Jeff Lorber stuff. So I'm coming to Europe with Jeff Lorber in November.
I hope to catch you somewhere. If you're close in Austria, I'll definitely catch you guys.
I'll stay in touch with you.
Yeah, please. If you're around, let me know. If you like wine, Slovenia is the place, man. So drop
That's
me
a good place for wine. Yes.
So, you know.
I agree.
But cool. Jimmy, man, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing some of these thoughts. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Maybe we could chat again sometime.
Yeah, would be over a bottle of wine.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
That sounds good.
Dr. Jazz.